G'day, Chris here and welcome back to ClickSpring. In this video, I make a small lathe carrier to drive this clock pillar between centres. So I'm making the pillars for the John Wilding skeleton clock, and I've hit a little snag. I'd like to do the ornamental turning between centres, but if I use one of my standard carriers, at some point I'll be clamping down on these curved sections, and I'm pretty sure that'll mark the part. I think it would be better to drive it from the spigot instead, but I'll need a different sort of carrier to do that. I saw a picture in a John Wilding book of this sort of carrier that'll do the job. He calls it an antique lathe carrier. The thin down section will grip short cylinders like the spigot, but still keep clear of the centre. And the thicker cross section at the outside can be drilled and tapped for a decent sized cap screw. So that's the plan, let's get started. Now I could have made this out of steel, but I decided to make it out of brass. I really enjoy working with brass. It's easier on the cutting tools and it should hold up okay to the wear and tear. If it gets a little banged up over time, I can remake it. So I cut off a decent slice and then squared it up on the mill. And then I got on with the layout. Actually, I spent quite a bit of time thinking about how I was going to make this part, and eventually I figured it was probably best to start with the central hole and then work on the perimeter. It took a bit of thought to come up with a sequence where I could make the cuts that I wanted and still hold and locate the part. So I drilled and then reamed the central hole 1/4 inch, and I probably didn't really need to ream it, but I wanted a nice snug fit with the pillars, and I figured it couldn't do any harm. And then I milled away most of the waste stock from the perimeter so that I ended up with two flat surfaces on either side of the curve. My plan was to use those as a reference surface to locate the part horizontally in the vise later on in the process. And you can see I've left it quite a bit short of the line too, mainly to give me a bit of material to work with when I'm doing the final finish. So with the bulk of the metal removed, I can get the curves into shape, and I did that with the bench filer and the belt sander. I started out on the bench filer. It's a great tool for clearing out corners so you can reach in with the belt sander later. And again, I've left it a little bit short of the line to allow for a bit of hand finishing. Now it's back to the mill, and you can see what I mean about using those surfaces to keep the part horizontal. I'm using a parallel under each side. I then picked up the edge and then drilled and tapped one side. And then I drilled the clearance hole on the other side. When the part is split later, the threaded and clearance holes swap sides and line up perfectly. And again, the reference surfaces helped me line up the part on this angle plate too, so I could mill away the central sections. I really should have got a new end mill for this. This one was a bit blunt and actually not quite long enough, so I had to nurse things along a bit here to avoid chatter. I ended up with a bit more chatter than I was happy with towards the end of the cut, so I tried plunging down at full depth, and that seemed to fix it. For the other side, I figured the plunge cuts worked so well before, let's do that again, except this time it didn't work out so well. It wasn't a huge amount of chatter, and I was planning on hand finishing the surfaces anyway, but there you go, no more using blunt tools. So that's most of the machine work done. All it needs now is a cut down the middle. I toyed with the idea of doing this by hand, mainly because it's a long cut and my widest blade won't go through the whole part. But then I figured I could probably make it work by cutting in from each end, so I gave that a go. It worked out okay, but the cuts were slightly off. Luckily I had enough material to tidy up by hand, so it didn't really matter. So first up, a bit of belt sander time to tidy up that saw cut. And I don't need those reference surfaces anymore, so they can be taken to the line too. There's a few fancy end curves to put in. And just a little bit of filing and sanding to take off the rough edges and give it a presentable surface finish. And I know what you're thinking, it's a lathe dog, what's he doing? But I just can't help it. It's still got to look good, at least until it gets all banged up. I softened the edges a little bit too. Some of those were still a bit sharp and I want them completely dull. And it's done. Time to give it a run. The spigots are a really nice snug fit. And the carrier grips around most of the surface area, so it shouldn't mark the part at all. And here it is about to do its first job. I'm glad I finally got around to making this. 1/4 inch seems to be a standard size for pillar spigots, so with a bit of luck you'll see this carrier pop up in plenty of future videos. Thanks for watching, I'll see you later.